Welcome to Reformed Thinking. I am your host, and today's deep dive actually begins with a little bit of a thought experiment.
Oh, I love those. Let's hear it.
So think about medical diagnostics for a second. When you break your arm, the whole process is, well, it's incredibly clean.
Right. Very straightforward.
Yeah. You go to the hospital, the technician takes an x-ray, and a jagged white line shows up on the black film.
You can literally see the problem.
Precisely. The doctor points at the screen and says, there is the fracture. It is totally binary. The bone is either broken or it is intact.
Then there is a strange sort of comfort in that visual certainty, isn't there?
There really is. I mean, we like our problems to be visible, categorized, and neatly defined. That way we can, apply a precise mechanical fix to them.
That desire for visual confirmation is just such a very human trait. We want a clear schematic for everything that goes wrong in our lives.
Oh, 100%. Like with a car.
Right, like a car. If your engine stalls, a mechanic can just plug a computer into the dashboard and read the error codes.
And then the problem is localized and fixed.
Spot on. But the moment you step away from orthopedics or mechanics and you step into the realm of the human soul, that entire diagnostic framework just completely falls apart.
It really does. The soul does not photograph well, unfortunately.
No, it does not. When we deal with spiritual depression or moral failure or just the sudden absence of joy, there are no error codes flashing on a screen.
Yeah, you are dealing with a totally invisible landscape.
Which makes diagnosing the root cause incredibly frustrating for anyone trying to fix themselves through sheer willpower.
And that specific frustration is the starting point for our analysis today.
It is a great place to start.
So we are opening up Charles Spurgeon's massive multi-volume commentary on the Psalms, the one called the Treasury of David.
An absolute classic in Reform circles.
Definitely. Specifically, we are looking at Psalm 119, verses 25 through 32.
Right, the fourth section, the octenary corresponding to the Hebrew letter Daleth.
Correct. And when Spurgeon introduces this section, he points out a very specific, almost heavy mood that just saturates the text.
He does. He notes that these 8 verses sing of severe depression.
But they do so wrapped in this spirit of intense devotion and fierce determination and just absolute dependence on God.
It is a fascinating mix of emotions.
It is. But hey, before we get moving into the actual text, we need to establish a ground rule for our conversation today.
Okay, lay it on me.
Given the massive theological weight of this material, we have agreed to a strict constraint check. We must allow each other to finish our complete thoughts without any interruptions.
That sounds like a very wise plan.
Yeah, I just think no cutting each other off mid-sentence today.
I am in complete agreement with that constraint. These theological concepts require significant breathing room to fully articulate.
They really do.
If we are going to accurately trace the mechanics of how grace operates in a depressed soul, rushing the explanation will only do you, the listener, a massive disservice.
I totally agree.
So I will gladly let you finish your thoughts, and I appreciate receiving the same courtesy as we work through this material.
Excellent. Okay, so to set the stage for you, the listener, we need to establish the theological framework operating behind these verses.
Which is so crucial.
It is. If you look at this text through the lens of historical Protestant Christianity, specifically leaning into Reformed theology and the Westminster Confession of Faith, these 8 verses are just a brilliant, raw illustration of human inability.
They really show that a believer is entirely dependent on God's grace for any forward motion in their spiritual life.
Right. We're looking at the doctrine of sanctification, the process of becoming holy.
And we are not looking at it as some self-improvement project where you pull yourself up by your bootstraps.
No, not at all. It is a sovereign operation of God from the first breath to the final step.
That is the core of it. Yeah.
And we are tracking a stunning narrative arc today. In verse 25, we find a man who is literally face down in the dirt, just paralyzed by spiritual lethargy.
Totally stuck.
But by the time we reach verse 32, this exact same man is sprinting forward in joyful obedience.
It is an incredible shift.
So our mission today is to trace how a person goes from a state of total paralysis to a full sprint, entirely through the intervention of God's word.
I am ready to jump in.
Awesome. Let's look at the opening scene, the grip of the dust and the melting soul.
Verse 25 begins with this very visceral cry. My soul cleaveth unto the dust, quicken thou me according to thy word.
And then verse 28 adds, my soul melteth for heaviness, strengthen thou me according unto thy word.
Those are heavy words.
Extremely heavy. When I was reading Thomas LeBlanc's commentary in the notes Spurgeon provided, a specific biological metaphor caught my eye.
Oh, the sea creature one.
Yes, exactly. LeBlanc compares the depressed soul to a polypus.
Right.
For those unfamiliar, a polypus in this context refers to a sea creature, like a limpet or a sea anemone.
Yeah.
You know, those things that glue themselves fast to the rocks in a tide point.
Right, they just lock on.
Yeah. When the waves crash over it, it does not move.
Mm-mm.
When you try to pry it off with your hands, it only clamps down harder.
It fights against you.
LeBlanc says the human soul cleaves to the earth just like that sea creature. It attaches itself to worldly things. He calls those things birdlime and glue.
That is a great visual.
It is, right. And it becomes incredibly difficult to tear the soul away from the dirt once it has fastened itself there.
That image of the polypus is a striking depiction of human nature under distress.
It really paints a picture.
And Albert Barnes expands on this concept in his notes. He focuses heavily on the original Hebrew word used for cleaveth.
Oh, okay. What is the word?
The word is dabak, and it carries the literal meaning of being glued, soldered, or securely fastened.
Soldered. Wow.
Yeah.
That implies heat and metal. That is permanent.
Right. Barnes clarifies that the psalmist is not describing a temporary rest or a brief moment of fatigue.
It is not just taking a nap.
No. The soul is fiercely adhering to low, base, groveling things. The affections of the heart have become soldered to the earth.
That is such a vivid way to describe depression or spiritual deadness.
It really is. The writer is expressing a continuous, agonizing tendency to cling to the dirt, feeling as though his very life force is being absorbed by the mold of the grave.
And this psychological reality takes a massive physical toll, which we see in verse 28 where he says, "My soul melteth."
Yes. Thomas Manton points out that the original language here suggests a wasting away.
Like losing physical weight.
Sort of. He compares it to an unctuous or fatty substance slowly dripping over a flame.
Oh, wow.
The sheer heaviness of his grief is exhausting both his physical stamina and his spiritual vitality. He is literally dissolving into tears, just entirely spent.
Hearing you describe that level of physical and emotional exhaustion brings a specific analogy to my mind, and I want to push on this point a little bit.
Go for it.
When a person is intensely depressed today, experiencing the kind of wasting away you just described, their very first instinct is to ask for comfort.
Naturally. That makes total sense.
Right. They go to a doctor, a therapist, or a friend, and the underlying plea is basically, please make this pain stop.
I just want relief.
They want a reprieve from the heaviness. But the psalmist does not ask for comfort in verse 25. He asks for life.
He says, "Quicken thou me."
Which literally means, make me alive. To me, asking for comfort when your soul is melting feels like treating a lethal infection with a mild painkiller.
That is a brilliant way to phrase it.
The painkiller might numb the symptom for an hour, but the bacteria is still actively shutting down your organs.
The root cause is untouched.
Right. Asking for life, on the other hand, is like demanding the heavy-duty antibiotic that cures the underlying disease.
It is a totally different approach.
So my question is, why does the psalmist bypass the natural human desire for comfort and immediately ask for life?
You hit the nail on the head with that medical analogy. To understand why he asks for life rather than mere comfort, we have to look at how Charles Spurgeon addresses this specific phrasing.
Okay, what does Spurgeon say?
Spurgeon writes, "More life is the cure for all our ailments."
More life. That is interesting.
If we connect this back to the Reformed view of human nature, we must recognize that our core problem is not that we are simply sad, misunderstood, or lacking serotonin.
Right. It is much deeper than biology or circumstances.
From a theological standpoint, our core problem is that we are prone to spiritual deadness. We are weighed down by the flesh, which is made of dust, and our natural inclination post-fall is to return to that dust.
So we are just magnetically drawn back to the dirt.
Precisely. Therefore, true revival is never just an emotional uplift. A temporary painkiller will not solve spiritual mortality.
Right, because dead people do not need painkillers.
Spot on. True revival requires a direct infusion of spiritual life. Spurgeon notes that a casual observer might think David should ask for comfort or upraising, but David possessed the wisdom to know that real comfort only flows out of increased vitality.
That makes a lot of sense.
When a person is physically weak and bent over toward the ground, the solution is not to just prop them up with crutches. The solution is to increase their internal stamina, to put more life into their system.
Because if you just prop them up, they are still sick.
Right. Once the internal life is restored, the spirit revives, and the body naturally becomes erect.
So the premise here is that trying to manually pry yourself off the rock or trying to shake off the dust through your own willpower is completely impossible, unless a new external source of life is injected into your system first.
Precisely. And the mechanism the psalmist relies upon for this injection of life is vital to understand.
You mean the second half of his plea?
Yes. Notice he says, "Quicken thou me according to thy word."
He did not ask for a feeling.
No, he's not looking for a vague, mystical experience in the woods. He is not hoping for a random surge of positive energy.
He is grounding it in Scripture.
He is making a direct, legal appeal to the revealed promises of God. John Sheffield notes in the commentary that the Word of God is the immortal seed by which a person is begotten again.
It is the active agent.
It is the hammer that breaks the rock and softens the heart. The psalmist rests his entire hope of resuscitation on what God has already spoken.
Because God's words actually do things.
That is spot on. He knows that the Creator who first formed a man from the dust and breathed life into his nostrils is the only one who can breathe life into a soul that is actively returning to the dust.
Oh, that connection back to Genesis is brilliant.
The solution to this severe spiritual paralysis is not a new morning routine or a self-help regimen. It is a desperate appeal to the Creator to perform a second act of creation within the soul.
That sets up a really fascinating progression.
How so?
Well, once a person recognizes this state of total inability, the realization that they cannot unglue themselves from the dirt and they must beg for external life, the very next logical step is to lay their entire reality bare before the physician.
Yes, which brings us to verse 26.
Right. This brings us right into verse 26. And the phrasing here is incredibly specific. The text says, "I have declared my ways, and thou heardest me. Teach me thy statutes."
Declared my ways.
I want to zero in on that phrase. In the context of the Hebrew, this implies a comprehensive, unvarnished confession.
Laying it all out there.
Yeah. It means taking a full inventory of your actions, your secret motives, your failures, and lying them out in the open.
Holding nothing back.
But I have to push back on the logic of this verse a bit, or at least challenge how it aligns with human nature and the nature of God.
Okay, I am listening.
Human instinct runs entirely contrary to the idea of a voluntary audit. Our primary reflex when we fail is to hide.
That is very true.
We see this all the way back in the opening chapters of Genesis. The moment Adam and Eve realized their ways were sinful, they did not run to God and declare their ways. They sewed fig leaves together and hid in the bushes.
They tried to cover it up.
And thousands of years later, you and I still do the exact same thing. We try to present a sanitized, highly edited version of ourselves to God and to the world.
We really do. We curate our image constantly.
So here's my challenge. If God is omniscient, if he already knows every single thought in my head and every mistake I've ever made, why does he require me to vocalize it?
That is a very common question.
If he already knows I am glued to the dust, isn't declaring my ways redundant? Why is the vocalization of my failures the necessary prerequisite for him teaching me his statutes?
That is a highly perceptive challenge, and it cuts to the core of how the Creator relates to his creatures.
I would love to hear how the commentators handle it.
To answer why an omniscient God requires vocalized declaration, we should look at a brilliant analogy provided by Paul Bain in the source material.
Okay.
Bain compares our relationship with God to a sick patient visiting a physician or a client consulting their legal counsel.
More medical analogies.
Imagine you go to a doctor with a severe, potentially permanent illness, but out of shame, you lie about your symptoms. You hide the fact that you have been drinking heavily, or you minimize the pain you are experiencing.
Right. You downplay it so you do not look bad.
The doctor might have access to your blood test results and suspect what is wrong, but if you actively conceal your condition, the doctor cannot properly treat you.
Because you are fighting the diagnosis.
Precisely. Similarly, if you hire a lawyer to defend you in a massive lawsuit, but you hide key pieces of incriminating evidence from them, they cannot build an effective defense.
That makes total sense.
God delights in the humble transparency of a vocalized confession because it signals the breaking of our pride.
Oh, so the confession is not for God's information. It is for our posture.
Yes. Bain points out a fascinating contrast here. If we were to lay all our wants, our humiliating weaknesses, and our invincible evils before a human being, we would likely lose their respect and their favor.
People judge us for our messes.
Human beings judge us harshly. But doing this with God actually wins his favor. He teaches the humble specifically because the humble scholar, having admitted their total ignorance and failure, will give their master all the honor for whatever they learn.
So the vocalization is not to inform God of something he does not know. The vocalization is the mechanism that shatters our self-reliance.
Correct. And Thomas Manton provides a masterful breakdown of what it actually means to declare our ways in practice.
How does he break it down?
Manton divides this declaration into three distinct theological acts.
Okay, what is the first one?
First, he says it is an act of faith and dependence. By declaring our business, our daily undertakings, and our plans to God, we are actively committing them to the direction of His providence.
We're consulting with him rather than acting autonomously.
Right. Second, Manton calls it an act of holy friendship.
Early friendship. I like that phrase.
This occurs when we share our sorrows, our anxieties, and our dangers with God, coming to Him much like one friend comes to another, hoping for pity, relief, and a sympathetic ear.
That is a very intimate way to view prayer.
It is. And third, it is an act of spiritual contrition. In biblical terminology, our ways very often refer to our temptations, our corruptions, and our actual sins.
So confessing the really dark stuff.
Yes. Declaring them in this context means confessing our sins with a genuine brokenness of heart.
Wow.
When we engage in these three specific acts, dependence, friendship, and contrition, we are systematically emptying ourselves of our own perceived self-sufficiency. We create a vacuum within the soul.
And nature abhors a vacuum.
It does, and it is only in that emptied space that God imparts His statutes. As Matthew Henry notes regarding this verse, David is essentially asking for a customized duty.
A customized duty, what does that mean?
Having laid his entire mess on the table, David is saying, "Now, Lord, tell me my duty. Let me know what thou wouldst have me to do as the case stands right now."
So declaring our ways out loud naturally generates a massive aversion to false ways.
It naturally follows, yes.
Think about it practically. If you have just spent agonizing time laying all your worst sins, your secret habits, and your shameful failures on the table before a holy God, the absolute last thing you want to do is pick those habits right back up.
You are disgusted by them at that point.
This intense desire for purity sets up the sharp contrast in the next couple of verses between falsehood and truth. Let us analyze verse 29 and verse 30.
Okay, read them for us.
Verse 29 says, "Remove from me the way of lying, and grant me thy law graciously." And then verse 30 acts as the pivot point. "I have chosen the way of truth, thy judgments have I laid before me."
The transition from lying to truth.
The specific phrasing in verse 29 grabbed my attention immediately. The text says, "Remove from me the way of lying," rather than saying, "Remove me from the way of lying."
That preposition makes a huge difference.
To me, that prepositional difference changes the entire theology of temptation. If the prayer was, "Remove me from the way of lying," it would be comparable to saying, "Lord, I live in a terrible neighborhood surrounded by bad influences. Please help me pack my bags and move to a safer town."
It treats the sin as a purely external environmental hazard.
Right. You just need to change your zip code to get holy.
Which we know is not true.
But praying, "Remove from me the way of lying," flips the script entirely. It is the terrifying realization that the ultimate danger is not outside your house. It is a deadly disease living inside your own chest.
It is a cancer in the soul.
The lie is internal, the false motives, the constant self-deceit, the hypocrisy, the urge to spin the truth to protect our egos. Those things are native to the human heart. We are not asking God to change our surroundings. We are asking Him to extract a tumor.
That analysis of the internal nature of the lie aligns flawlessly with the commentary provided by Thomas LeBlanc and John Calvin.
Oh, Calvin has some thoughts on this.
Very much so. But first, LeBlanc is very explicit on this point. He states that the way of iniquity is fundamentally within us.
It is built in.
Following the doctrine of original sin, he notes that we are born children of wrath, and our innate, uncontrolled passions run naturally toward the lie. We do not need to be taught how to deceive. It is our default operating system.
You do not have to teach a toddler to lie. They just figure it out.
Spot on. But John Calvin's analysis of this verse provides a massive, sobering historical context that we must consider.
What context is that?
Calvin points out that we are reading the words of David, and David's life featured some of the most catastrophic moral failures recorded in ancient history.
Right.
Calvin specifically directs our attention to David's horrific sin with Bathsheba and the subsequent premeditated murder of her husband, Uriah the Hittite.
That is a brutally dark chapter.
Think about the mechanics of that historical event. David committed adultery, and when Bathsheba became pregnant, David did not immediately confess. Instead, he fell into a complex, calculated tissue of equivocation.
The cover-up is always worse.
He brought Uriah back from the front lines, tried to get him to go home and sleep with his wife to cover up the paternity, and when Uriah's honor prevented him from doing so, David wrote a letter.
A death warrant, basically.
Yes, he commanded his generals to abandon Uriah in the thickest part of the battle so he would be slaughtered. David used the enemy army as his own personal assassination squad.
It is just chilling when you lay it out like that.
Calvin uses this horrifying sequence of events to illustrate how easily and how deeply even a mature believer can fall into self-deceit.
Because David was not a novice.
Not at all. He had a great beginning. He was recognized as a prophet. He possessed immense spiritual knowledge, and he had experienced profound intimacy with God. Yet he fell mightily.
It shows nobody is immune.
Calvin argues that this history teaches us never to fall into foolish arrogancy. We cannot look at our past good deeds or our current theological knowledge and assume the devil can win no more victories over us.
We drop our guard, and we are done.
Calvin asserts that unless we are continually held up by God's mighty and strong hand, our own corrupt nature will inevitably lead us astray. The way of lying is an internal corruption that requires constant divine extraction.
It is genuinely terrifying to realize that a man with David's unparalleled spiritual resume, the man who killed Goliath, who wrote the 23rd Psalm, who was called man after God's own heart, could orchestrate a calculated murder purely to protect his own reputation.
It proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that no human being can ever operate on spiritual autopilot.
But you can never reach a level of maturity where you stop needing grace.
Never.
You have to wake up every single day and beg God to grant you his law graciously, as the text says, because your default setting is self-deception.
That is the daily reality of the Christian life.
And that realization brings us to a massive theological friction point in verse 30.
Okay, where is the friction?
After begging God to remove the internal lie, David boldly declares, I have chosen the way of truth. Now, I want to press into the mechanics of this choice. Based on everything we just discussed regarding human inability, total depravity, and the native internal corruption of the human heart, how can David possibly claim to choose the truth?
That is the million-dollar question.
If the lie is the default operating system, and we are completely dead in the dust, where does the capacity to make a holy choice originate? How do we reconcile man's deadness with man's choice?
You have just articulated the central tension of Reformed soteriology. How does a dead will choose life?
Exactly. I mean, it seems like a contradiction.
William Cowper's commentary in our source material addresses this apparent paradox beautifully. He relies heavily on the doctrine of unconditional election.
Okay, unpack that for us.
Cowper asserts that the only reason David has the capacity to say, I have chosen the way of truth in time, is because God made a prior sovereign choice in eternity past.
Oh, so God goes first.
Always. Cowper writes that the choice David makes actually proceeds from that divine election whereby the Lord, before all time, made choice of David. The formula is straightforward but heavy. We choose God solely because he first chose us.
If he did not move first, we would just stay in the dust forever.
If the Creator had not unilaterally chosen us to be his people, we could never, in our corrupt state, have chosen him to be our God.
So the human choice is real, but it is a reaction.
Yes. So, the physical historical act of a believer choosing the way of truth, deliberately deciding to follow God's commands, actively rejecting the internal lie, and intentionally laying God's judgments before them, is the undeniable, visible fruit of an invisible divine election.
Is the evidence of the invisible work.
It is the empirical evidence that sovereign grace has already been actively working in the soul. The choice the believer makes is entirely real. It is deliberate, it involves the human will, and it requires effort. But that will has been radically renewed.
It's a new operating system.
Thomas Watson adds a highly practical layer to this concept, noting that true religion is never a matter of chance. It is a matter of deliberate choice.
We have to make a conscious decision.
Watson says, we must sit down, rationally reckon the cost, and resolve to own Christ even when the swords and staves are up. Meaning, even under the threat of persecution or death.
That is a heavy commitment.
But the Reformed framework insists that the fuel required to make that radical resolution is supplied entirely by the grace we just discussed. The engine of human choice only runs on the fuel of divine election.
So if we take this heavy theology and apply it to how you and I live our daily lives, what does it look like?
That is the practical application.
It means that if we are going to actively choose the truth, we must thoroughly understand what that truth actually is. You cannot choose to follow a map you do not comprehend.
That is a great point.
And that logical necessity brings us to the prerequisite for holy speech, which is the absolute focus of verse 27. The psalmist writes, "Make me to understand the way of thy precepts, so shall I talk of thy wondrous works."
Make me to understand.
I want to take this ancient verse and lay it directly over our modern culture for a moment. We currently live in an era where millions of people frequently and loudly talk about things they do not comprehend.
Oh, that is painfully true.
The internet has given everyone a global microphone. Everyone is expected to have a fully formed opinion on every complex geopolitical event, theological debate, or cultural crisis the moment it happens.
The pressure to speak is immense.
The sheer speed at which we are culturally pressured to talk leaves absolutely zero time for the slow, agonizing work of understanding. Are we as a society and even as the church far too eager to talk before we ever pause to ask God to make us understand?
It is a pervasive cultural sickness, and you are absolutely right to point out that it is entirely antithetical to the biblical pattern outlined in verse 27.
It seems like we have it completely backwards.
We do. Spurgeon is incredibly sharp, almost caustic on this specific point. He forcefully asserts that talk without intelligence is mere talk and idle talk.
He does not mince words.
He makes a fascinating observation about human psychology, noting that half the wonder in the world is born out of sheer ignorance.
Ignorance. How so?
People marvel at things simply because they do not understand how they work, like a child marveling at a magic trick.
Oh, right. Because they do not see the sleight of hand.
But Spurgeon argues that holy wonder is the child of understanding. When a person truly comprehends the intricate, majestic way of the divine precepts, they completely lose the desire to talk about their own trivial accomplishments, and they naturally begin to extol the works of the Lord.
The focus shifts entirely off of themselves.
The sequence laid out in this text is rigid and non-negotiable. First, there must be a divine enlightenment of the mind. The plea is, make me to understand.
We cannot just figure it out on our own.
We cannot gain this spiritual insight from a university, a podcast, or a book. It must come directly from the Lord's hands. Natural blindness, as Thomas Manton describes it, is an obstinate disease that refuses to yield to human logic.
It requires a divine cure.
A little hearsay knowledge or scanning a headline is entirely insufficient for holy speech.
I want to pause on that phrase you used. Holy wonder is the child of understanding.
It is a beautiful thought.
That flips our normal definition of wonder on its head. We typically think of wonder as the feeling we get when we are totally confused, when something is mysterious or shrouded in fog.
Right, the mystical approach to wonder.
But Spurgeon is saying that true biblical wonder occurs when the fog clears. You do not marvel at God because he is a confusing blur. You marvel at God because you see the terrifying, beautiful precision of his decrees, his providence, and his justice. The clearer the understanding, the heavier the wonder.
Spot on. And Manton observes that when this true grace takes root in an enlightened mind, it becomes highly communicative.
It wants to share itself.
He likens grace to fire. You cannot easily conceal a fire. It naturally spreads, it gives off heat, and it illuminates its surroundings.
Fire is a great analogy.
When the human heart is heavily affected by a genuine understanding of God's wondrous works, specifically his works of creation, his intricate acts of providence, and the massive accomplishment of redemption, the tongue simply cannot hold it in.
It just bubbles over.
Out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. But Manton highlights a strict three-step operational order that we must adhere to.
Okay, what are the 3 steps?
Step 1, divine enlightenment of the mind through prayer.
Asking God for sight.
Step 2, rigorous meditation. This involves laying the judgments before us, studying them intensely, and internalizing their implications.
That takes a lot of time and quietness.
Step 3, communication for the edification of others. If we skip step 1 and step 2, our talk is empty, vain, and potentially destructive.
Which is what social media essentially encourages us to do. Skip steps 1 and 2.
It certainly does. But if we patiently follow the pattern, allowing God to forge understanding in the quiet places first, our words become incredibly valuable. As Spurgeon vividly puts it, words spoken from true understanding become like pearls which adorn the ears of them that hear.
All right, so taking all of this in the pleading for life, the unvarnished confession, the internal extraction of the lie, the slow pursuit of understanding, we realize that this is not a weekend retreat.
Not at all. It is a long haul.
This process of learning, meditating, and speaking is a grinding, lifelong pursuit. It requires an immense amount of perseverance.
Which is hard when you're exhausted.
Which provides the perfect transition into our final section today. Sticking and running, or the dynamics of grace, We're looking at the final two verses of our section, verses 31 and 32.
Let us hear them.
Verse 31 says, I have stuck unto thy testimonies, O Lord, put me not to shame. And verse 32 is the grand climax of the entire octonary. I will run the way of thy commandments when thou shalt enlarge my heart.
What a beautiful resolution.
Reading verse 32 immediately brings the image of a massive sailboat to my mind.
A sailboat. Tell me more.
Imagine you have built the finest sailboat in the harbor. You have polished the wood, you have the best rigging, and you hoist the sails as high as they can go.
Okay, I am picturing it.
Hoisting the sails represents our human desire to obey God. You can have all the right intentions, you can have the theology perfectly mapped out in your head, but unless the wind actually blows, unless the invisible breath of nature fills those canvas sails, that beautiful boat goes absolutely nowhere.
It just sits dead in the water.
You are just bobbing on the water, entirely stagnant. In the theology of this text, God enlarging the human heart is the wind.
That analogy of the sailboat perfectly captures the Reformed doctrine of grace and human effort. The desire to run, the hoisting of the sails, is present in the believer, but the actual capacity to move forward requires a decisive divine intervention.
The wind has to blow.
Let us analyze this specific physiological metaphor of the enlarged heart. Commentators Henry Melville and Thomas Manton provide deep insights into what we might call the physiology of the fallen soul.
The physiology of the soul. That is an interesting concept.
They explain that the human heart physically and spiritually contracted at the fall of man. The introduction of sin and selfishness caused the soul to shrink inward.
Like it cramped up.
It became narrow, tight, and completely unequal to containing great, generous, or holy thoughts. It became a bondaged heart, severely limited in its capacity.
It turned in on itself.
It drew all its affections away from the expansive glory of God and focused them entirely on the tiny, pathetic idol of the self. Therefore, for a human being to run in the way of God's massive commandments, God must perform a radical spiritual surgery. He must dilate, stretch, and widen the heart.
When you use the phrase spiritual surgery, it implies something very specific about the state of the patient.
What does it imply to you?
A patient undergoing open-heart surgery is completely anesthetized. They're entirely passive on the operating table. They do not assist the surgeon with the scalpel. Are we saying the believer is entirely passive in this process of having their heart enlarged?
In the initial moment of regeneration, yes, the patient is entirely passive. This is the core of the Reformed doctrine of effectual calling.
God is the sole actor in that moment.
God acts first upon the dead heart. He replaces the heart of stone with a heart of flesh. He changes it, unites its fragmented desires, and forcefully enlarges its capacity to receive his love.
So he forces the sails open and brings the wind.
However, the immediate result of this sovereign internal surgery is highly active. Once the heart is enlarged, the immediate fruit is the cheerful, ready, and swift motion of the feet. Notice the text says, I will run.
It is a sprint.
It does not say, I will be dragged. It is not a forced march where God is pulling a reluctant prisoner by a chain. As Spurgeon accurately notes, grace is not an overwhelming physical force which compels unwilling minds to move contrary to their desires.
That is a crucial distinction. It is not coercion.
Rather, grace changes the desire itself. It is the spontaneous leaping forward of a mind which has finally been set free from its chains. When the heart is surgically enlarged by God, the man becomes, as Melville states, all heart.
All heart. I love that.
Every faculty of the mind, every muscle of the body, and every affection of the soul is brought into joyful subjection to God. This results in a firm, resolute, and unflinching obedience.
The Scottish theologian Robert Leighton has a quote regarding this specific progression of grace that I think is just breathtaking.
Oh, Leighton is wonderful. What is the quote?
He writes, If thou do but creep on, desire to be enabled to go, if thou goest, but yet haltingly desire to run.
That is so encouraging for those who feel slow.
It perfectly captures this relentless, agonizing yearning for a swifter spiritual pace, a deeper level of obedience. And if we pull the camera all the way back and look at the 8 verses we just covered, the contrast is staggering.
From beginning to end.
Look at where we started. In verse 25, we had a man whose soul was glued to the dirt, unable to lift his own head.
The polypus on the rock.
By verse 28, he was melting away, physically exhausted by the heavy weight of his own sin and depression. He was completely paralyzed. But now, in verse 32, this exact same man is sprinting down the road of God's commandments.
It is a stunning reversal.
His heart is dilated and wide open. His feet are moving swiftly. His sails are full of wind. It is a total miraculous reversal of his initial condition.
It is a total reversal, and the most critical takeaway for anyone studying this text is accurately identifying the cause of that reversal.
Right, who gets the credit?
From the lowest, suffocating depths of depression to the highest, windswept peaks of zealous obedience, the believer must attribute every single ounce of progress to the free favor and sovereign grace of God. The theology here leaves no room for human boasting.
None at all. We contributed nothing but the dust.
The man lying face down in the dust could not stand up on his own strength. The man infected with the internal disease of lying could not extract the truth and choose truth on his own.
The man who was ignorant could not generate holy understanding.
And the man who desperately wanted to run could not move a single muscle in his feet until God surgically enlarged his heart. Every single step of the way, the operative phrases are, according to thy word, teach me, make me, and enlarge my heart.
It is all God's action.
The entire octonary is one sustained, desperate cry of absolute dependence on the Creator.
So to bring all of this weighty theology directly down to the ground for you, the listener, we have traced a remarkable path today.
We really have.
We started by acknowledging the uncomfortable reality of our own spiritual deadness, that native gravitational pull that makes us cleave to the dust when life gets hard.
The total inability.
We saw the absolute necessity of auditing our souls out loud, confessing our ways to God without hiding behind fig leaves or rationalizations.
Laying it all out for the physician.
We recognized the terrifying truth that the lie is an internal disease, not an external circumstance. And we saw our desperate need for God to surgically remove it so we can actively choose his truth.
Choosing it because he chose us.
We learned the hard lesson that true, holy wonder must precede our speech, forcing us to slow down and understand before we open our mouths. And finally, we saw that even with the best intentions, we must wait on the wind of God's Spirit to enlarge our contracted hearts so we can finally run.
It is a complete theological picture of grace.
I want to challenge you to heavily evaluate your own spiritual pace right now. Think about your life this week.
It is a good time for a self-audit.
If you feel like your soul is violently cleaving to the dust, if you feel glued to a state of heaviness and you cannot seem to pry yourself off the rock, the solution is not to try and sprint on your own strength.
You will only exhaust yourself.
You cannot manufacture the wind. Your willpower is not enough. The biblical solution is to stop striving, lay there in the dust, and aggressively pray for the great physician to quicken you according to his written promises.
If I may add one final thought to that challenge, something for you to ponder long after this audio finishes.
Please do.
If running in God's commandments absolutely requires him to enlarge our hearts first, how should that theological reality change the way we view our moments of complete spiritual standstill?
That is a heavy question.
When we are depressed, we tend to fall into a cycle of intense, guilt-driven self-reliance. We beat ourselves up for not running fast enough. But could it be that our seasons in the dust are actually God's precise method of preparation?
Breaking us down to build us back up.
Could it be that he allows the X-ray machine of our own self-righteousness to break down entirely, leaving us helpless in those muddy waters for a highly specific reason?
To shatter our pride.
Perhaps he leaves us glued to the rock just long enough to force us to realize that we cannot take a single solitary step toward holiness without his breath filling our lungs. The dust, it turns out, is where the surgery happens.
That reframes everything about how we view those brutal, low moments in our lives. It changes the dust from a place of final defeat into a place of divine preparation. Keep seeking truth, everyone, and wait on the wind. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive into the Treasury of David. We will see you next time.